So I'd like to welcome everyone to our first session today. This is our second quarterly summit of the year for our HX Leaders Network. We were doing monthly webinars for the first few years, and then decided last year with COVID to go more quarterly and have groups of speakers speaking on similar topics. And so I hope everyone is doing well. It seems like most regions, most countries have emerged or starting to emerge from COVID. I know in some places like India, it's still quite a serious issue, but I know in Europe and the US and Latin America, in some places it's doing a little better. But wherever you are, I wish you well. And I hope 2021 is proving to be a good year for you. I know it's been challenging the last 18 months for many of us, and we've gone through all sorts of things. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to get together every so often and really talk about what's going on in our businesses and how we can really help shape and support our colleagues as they are trying to do some really important work and keep our businesses not only operating, but thriving at a very challenging time. So with that, I want to introduce our speaker for today, Tope Sadiku. Tope is someone I just met recently, and I'm just wondering why I didn't meet you earlier, because you seem like a fascinating person with great amount of experience and really interesting experience. And Tope is currently at Kraft Heinz, and she's had an interesting background in finance and supply chain and some other areas. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, but as you told me the other day, Tope, you're not a typical HR person, which is great. So glad to have you and your experience here today. And with that, I'll turn the time over to you. And we will have opportunity for, if you have questions during the session, please text or text. That'd be the best way in the chat. And we'll also have time for Q&A the last quarter or third or so of our time. So with that, time over to you, Tope. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and good morning, everybody. And it's super good morning for some of us. It's very, very early for everybody out there. But as Ali mentioned, like, my background is not traditional. Actually, it's never been traditional or typical in whatever I have done. So I work for the Kraft Heinz company. At Kraft Heinz, my official title is Global Head of Employee Digital Experience. So for those of you who know Kraft Heinz, we're a consumer goods company, or FMCG. We have 40,000 employees globally. We typically say 50-50 split between like our frontline, we call them blue collars, and then the other half is like our, we call them like office workers, but you may call them knowledge or white collar workers. And I look at how people can achieve the promise of work through the use of technology. And for me, that sounds really vague, but I kind of like that. The direction from my CIO is employees should have a delightful experience with technology. But I don't believe technology leads. If I would almost sometimes describe myself as a corporate doctor. So you go to the doctor's office and the doctor doesn't say, okay, we will cut the leg off before you've even spoken. And you're like, doctor, that's not even, I've got a little bit of a headache, nothing wrong with my leg. What the doctor does, you come in, the doctor watches, the doctor listens, the doctor will sometimes ask questions. And maybe the patient will say, hey, doctor, my knee hurts. But then the doctor says, okay, please just walk these 100 meters there and back. And actually you recognize that it's nothing about the knee, but it's about the position of the foot. And maybe the patient is walking on like a bowed foot. So you say, if we correct the foot, we correct the knee, and actually we don't need to operate on the knee. And in the same way as a doctor may have like a plethora of medical medicine in their toolkit, you know, the doctor may say, we'll just listen. The doctor may say, we'll tweak a prescription. The doctor may even say, we've got to amputate, that could actually be a thing. Or the doctor may just say, let's watch and see. Now, there's so many different solutions a doctor will take, and that's exactly my approach with technology. So as I said, it's very human-centric, very employee-first, with technology being the means by which we lead. And as Elliot mentioned, my background's been quite eclectic today. Actually, I started off in finance. I majored in finance, accounting, and economics. I spent a number of years in finance. I became a chartered accountant, which is like I guess you guys call them CPAs here. But became a chartered accountant, always worked in finance for probably like the first 10, even maybe up to 15 years of my career. Then I moved to Kraft Heinz. I started to look after their investments in technology and their operational costs. Then I moved to head up technology for the Central, Northern, and Eastern Business Unit. I came back, I led the Technology Center of Excellence in the European zone, and then I moved to Chicago to do the position I'm in now. So it's never been, none of this has been linear. I don't even think it would make logical sense even if you wrote it out. But I'd say the one thing that was always common through everything was the ability to be a critical thinker and break problems down, the ability to listen, and then the ability to put people first, especially with no background in technology, but heading technology for a huge business unit. It was really just about like listening and understanding who my stakeholders were, and then maybe who I had in my team that could help me deliver things. So yeah, that is me.
That's great. So Tope, tell us a little bit about how you think of hybrid work and what are some of the biggest challenges you're thinking about right now at Kraft Heinz? I know hybrid work is a topic because we've talked about this.
Yeah. And hybrid work for me, I think of like modes of work. One of the things the pandemic has done is proven the fact that you don't need to be in a specific location to deliver a specific objective. And I know we'll talk about this later, but let's even just look at life. You know, people used to think I could only work out at a gym. Now people are at home, and your bedroom or your living room serves as your gym. It serves as the school for your children. It also serves maybe as like your office space. You're able to achieve different objectives in different places. So now you have to break it down to like the different modes of work. And we ran some ethnographies, and based on other academic literature that was produced, we identified 3 main modes of work. So one is like this idea of deep focused work. And deep work is this idea that, you know, you have a finite period in time, you have an objective, and you just need to be able to concentrate. And deep work tends to be on like a one-on-one or like a one or a one-on-two level, really, really small groups, focus on a particular objective with a particular outcome over a particular piece of time. The second mode of work is this idea of collaboration. And collaboration, let's forget about where that happens, but let's just talk about what it is. And it's like groups of people working together to maybe ideate, to problem solve, because you need multiple different inputs to deliver a particular objective. And that can happen on short scale. So it might just be on it could even be on a 30-minute level. It could be on a month-long level. It could be on a day level. Really, I'm not too concerned about the time in the period, but really more about the mode. And then the third one is this idea of creativity and inspiration. And I'm looking out the window because for me, that happens like outside of my current environment, outside of any familiar environment. I kind of actually need to like break the automatic habit. But this idea of like you've got sufficient inputs, and you do need the inputs, and you need to solve maybe like a wicked problem. There's not really, it's not necessarily always so time bound, but you need to you're ruminating on something that you're trying to solve. So when I think about hybrid work, I think about how does the workspace facilitate these different modes of work? When do they happen? What does it look like in my family or my organization? And how does work permit that in a frictionless manner where people can remain in their flow? This concept of flow is it's so part of my vernacular now, but idea of frictionless work.
Sorry, do we have a comment from somebody or a question? I think we just have an unmuted mic, so go ahead.
No, that's how I think about hybrid work. That's what I'm responding to.
And what are some things that Kraft Heinz is doing right now? What are maybe some things you're doing to support that in your current role?
Yeah. So we're now, as most organizations are, looking at return to office. And for me, it's called return to office, but mainly return to the physical location that you also knew in the past. I don't believe work as it was done in the past will exist in the future. I actually don't even believe the work as we do it today will exist in the future. But what we're looking at is how do we make the office appealing for a particular mode of work? So what's the weighting of the spaces that we need for like deep work? What is the weighting of the spaces that we need for collaboration? And is the office the right place for creativity and inspiration? If so, how do we kind of how do we create like a fertile ground to enable this mode? So really what we're looking at now is what does return to office look like, and how do we create a harmonious experience between someone who's based remotely at home and somebody who may be based in an office space? Because, one thing we're looking at is our hybrid, we're calling it like our hybrid work plan, which is almost like a 3-2, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. So how do we, one thing the pandemic has done for us is democratize technology. It's leveled the playing field. As we are today, we're in Zoom and everybody's box is equal. So, and everybody's voice is also equal. Nobody's voice is elevated above another. And in a physical office in the past, it would always be the people who were in specific locations within a room with the loudest voice who maybe commanded that power and presence. And actually that wasn't always the best outcome for the group. So really, how are we managing our return to office, making the office appealing? And how do we almost keep that democratization of technology, the leveling of the playing field, irrespective of where you are? Something we had a call yesterday and we're talking about what if we created these like entirely immersive rooms? So what well-being being one of the things that most organizations are very interested in, and it is just the right thing to care about now. Well, what if you had a room that made you feel like you were in a park or in the Alps, and there are technologies that exist that can give you that benefit? And when you look at neuroscience, sometimes the brain can't tell between something happening in real life and something being like hacked or implanted in such a way. So yeah, these are some of the really cool ideas and initiatives that we're looking at now.
And how has this changed or evolved or strengthened through the pandemic? Take us through a little bit of some of the things that have happened for you there and what you've learned.
Sure. One really strong thing that's came out is that work is not, before the pandemic, I used to talk about this idea of like a virtual workspace. In fact, this was probably like middle of 2019. And I remember I had a strategy and I said, in the next 3 to 5 years, let's be exploring the virtual workspace. And it just didn't make sense. There was no urgency. And it was kind of a little bit blue sky in those days. And in 3 to 5 months, then it happened. And I guess the reality is that COVID acted as like a catalyst, a sincere catalyst for change. It helped us understand that you can separate location from objective. People can be effective at home. You don't always have to manage by observation. People can be incentivized to work well. Actually, even if you give people a lot of autonomy in their day, they can identify areas where they can be productive, efficient, creative themselves. People being at home helped almost break this idea of a 9 to 5. I mean, of course, everybody's online 9 to 5, but as we are in this call, Elliot, I know it's 6 a.m. for you. Damon, you're saying it's 5 a.m. for you. It's 7 a.m. for me in Chicago. You can figure out what times work well for your rhythm and your mode, and you can almost break down your day into times that suit your internal rhythm. And by that, I mean, I believe there's a time when so if I talk about myself, I'm better at having conversations around more kind of research-led conversations very early in the morning. I tend to use the latter part of my day for just getting work done and just cranking like actions and getting things off my to-do list. And then I like to be quite creative towards the middle of the day. And being at home is kind of giving people the freedom and the flexibility to just work towards their rhythms, not the rhythm of the office. So, yeah.
What was the experience for people at Kraft Heinz like last year? Take us through a little bit of where you were a year ago from today, for example. What were people talking about?
Yeah, one of the interesting thing was that I kept hearing this idea of I want to be back in the office. I get my energy from people. I miss my colleagues. And if you think of the Kubler-Ross change, it was the grief curve. Everybody went through that. Everybody went to this valley of despair and then up to elation. And I recognize that change it doesn't feel comfortable in the beginning, but all of a sudden it just becomes natural and automatic. I recognize that people in the business felt like I don't know how to work effectively at home, and everybody figured it out. I don't know how to create a space to work effectively at home, and we kind of offered these meeting etiquette guides and how to meet smarter, not just how to have effective meetings at home, but really how to rethink the purpose and the objective of a meeting and ask yourself, is this meeting relevant? And if not, how else could I get this outcome that I'm looking for? So there was a lot of uncertainty, and actually HR and IT kind of really stepped into that space, listened to employees, and we created these digital productivity. we call them digital productivity webinars, but it was almost like a program where we spoke about, there were 4 main themes: the art of collaboration, smarter meetings, as I've mentioned, business agility, and then design thinking. So Damon, as we were just talking before we started, design thinking being the one that most recently culminated, but how you solve problems in new creative ways. It gave us this opportunity to look at new digital behaviors that were needed for this new digital future, and almost like the barrier that you would normally have faced when there's no urgency for change was removed, so people were very, very receptive. On top of which, I think being at home also made people feel more personal. So around about this time last year, actually, we did this conversations with the leadership team where everybody in the leadership team spoke about our new values. They spoke about what the values mean to them and how they wanted to implement it. And then actually they focused on a behavior that was interesting to them, or a topic or a book. And it made it so personal. I would say, even though we're further away, what I hear from employees is that we feel closer than ever, which is, I'm quite proud of that for sure.
Thank you for that. What are some examples of some new digital tools or capabilities that you developed to support some of these things that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think everybody can relate to needing to create a system to keep employees connected. You know, in the past, well, Kraft Heinz is a Microsoft enterprise. So we rolled out Microsoft Teams. It was actually March of last year. In fact, we had Teams 18 months before, but in like a proof of concept phase, because we still had Skype. We took Skype out and we put Teams in, and we really focused on not just what is this technology, but how can this change how you work? How can this connect you to people? How can you collaborate in documents that you probably didn't even know you could in the past? How can you share information internally and externally in secure and safe ways? How can you kind of break down the barriers of emails and speak with people more informally? How can you tame your inbox? It was a very, very big one. How do you tame your inbox and tame your meeting time? So Teams for me was one of the biggest game changers in the organization. It really helped to kind of remove that formality of emails and remove the bureaucracy of emails and make work more fluid. What I love about Teams, and by the way, I'm tech agnostic, but you can replace Teams with not Skype, like Salesforce Chatter, Facebook Workspace, Slack, whichever one you chose. It's device agnostic. So I can be working on my laptop, or I can be working on a desktop, and then I can move to my mobile, or I can just move to a call. You know, it democratized technology in such a novel way that it enabled people to just stay in that flow and remove the friction from work.
And what kinds of new skills or new capabilities did your team learn that you thought were most useful?
New skills, I'd say design thinking. Because design thinking, and so I actually technically sit within the technology function. And as a technologist, you should really be an empathetic solution engineer. You should listen to I'm saying customer, you should listen to the employee, and it should be very human-centered. However, we found ourselves in a situation where an employee would say, IT, this doesn't work and I want it fixed this way. And IT would say, okay, I will fix it exactly like that, almost asking the employee to solution any problem that they had. And design thinking and this more human-centered design, we call it design to delight, but really being human first, employee empathy driven, and proactive solution engineering has been such a game changer. Reframing how we think about how we meet the needs of employees helps us actually meet the needs of our customers better, right? Because it's just the same mindset with a different end user.
That's great. And how does Kraft Heinz listen, or how would I guess more specifically, how does your team listen to end users, customers, and what they need?
Yeah, I have an open door policy, and I know that sounds, because we have 40,000 employees, and I really make sure that everyone on my team is not just the name of the team, but has a name. I want people to be able to say, I don't like this feature, I don't like this, I don't like that. and they speak to a person. You know, how annoying is it when you have to call like a customer service line and you just cannot get to a person on the end? I really wanted to make it personal. Now, most people don't take that solution or take that route, but for those that do, it's very much available and offered. We also survey and we run these annual employee engagement surveys, which is like a point in time where we can see what is the general pulse of the organization. But then we also we've been running a lot of ethnographies, so observing how employees work in their natural environment. And even that's been one of the most successful things, even in this remote space. Again, we've also been running a number of discovery sessions where we kind of say, how do you work today? How do you want to work in the future? And let's like map that out. And really what I love about that is future state doesn't necessarily end up being the future state, but it's interesting how groups define and design that and how they articulate what success looks like. And then finally, we have something called our collaborations champions, which is like a group or a team. It's a team space. Again, you could use Slack, you could use any kind of group or forum where people can just give feedback. And originally it started off where we would say, hey, we're just going to post things here before we release them we kind of make them readily available for employees to send to polls. Like, do you guys agree? What do you think? And it organically grew into this forum of almost like 500 employees where someone will ask a question and organically the group will answer the question. And I really like that idea of like a self-serve forum where you can have a direct input into IT and into HR, but then also your colleagues can answer and respond to your questions as well. And through that, we've been like, if there's something that someone can't answer, then we know that's a space we have to lean into. But sometimes people know the answer. Oh, the answer exists, but it's just not readily known or it's not articulated in a way that makes sense to that employee.
Thank you. And what, in terms of IT products or digital products in the last year, what are the things that you're most proud of?
For sure, Teams. For sure, Microsoft Teams. In fact, Microsoft recently ran a case study on our implementation of Teams, because we didn't just use it as a replacement for Skype. We use it as a business unlocker, is how we like to define it. We really wanted to create a space where people can stay in the flow of work. And I know I keep saying the flow and removing the friction, but just for those of you who have like Apple products, how nice is it when you've got like your Apple Watch, your mobile, your tablet, your TV, and everything just syncs. So I can move into different spaces and I don't have to think, okay, how am I going to play music here? Or how do we want to watch this? Or how will I listen to this podcast? How do I make this call? How can I FaceTime with my friends and family? You kind of trust the device and you're just able to use it in that moment. And using Teams as this like, ubiquitous, let's say, tool that works with all of our solutions, both in the office and at home, has removed that friction. I want people to be able to trust a device. And I don't pick my mobile up and think, can this make a call? I pick my mobile up and think, I want to call Elliot. I need to tell Elliot X, Y, or Z. And really like leaning into the technology to create this like harmonious, universal, frictionless, as simple as possible solution has been one of the biggest reframers that we've had. We've totally rationalized our technology portfolio. And it's been great. It's been easier to manage. It's reduced costs, as you can imagine, but it's just kept people happy. It's enabled people to be happy. And it really is like the low-hanging fruit.
Thank you. So we have a question from Samantha, and hi, Samantha. And I hope you're still in Paris. We had a nice visit a couple of years ago before all of this. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for your question. She asks, could you please share more about the digital behaviors that you identified?
Yeah, and actually, Samantha, the way we identified these digital behaviors was through observation. We kind of had like a hypothesis, but I'm a big believer in having something that you want to test, but not being too stuck to the fact that it could just be wrong, totally wrong. And we ran these ethnographies. In fact, how it started was I started with our CEO. I went to his direct reports, to his, like the direct reports. So I found the leaders of the different functions. And I said, tell me about we call them rituals and routines. But I said, well, what are the main objectives of your function? How does it work? Is it on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, a yearly basis? Is it on a project basis? And tell me how you define success. And these are just generic questions because I wanted to understand a bit more about how things run in the local business and some of the areas for improvement. And through running these ethnographies and actually just really the questions I could have came up with myself if I looked at like a P&L. But really it was the ability to kind of build trust and relationships with those different leaders. And that's how we identified those 4 digital behaviors. So just to repeat them again, the first one was the art of collaboration. I found people would say, I work in legal, and I'm in global legal, but I need to share files with somebody who works in the international zone or somebody who works in APAC, US, Canada. I don't know how. I don't know how to do that in a secure and safe manner. I don't know how to do that in a prompt manner where I can kind of assign tasks by a particular deadline. And we realized that although these collaborative tools existed and we knew the technical capabilities of them, they weren't necessarily articulated into like business speak. So really, if SharePoint or OneDrive, I can use it on any device, well, what does that actually mean? If I can back things to the cloud, that's great, but really what does that mean? And how does that like work in a business context, knowing the rituals and routines of the organization? The second one, again, about smarter meetings, was more than just how do I hold effective meetings and how am I effective meeting attendee? I mean, we did talk about that because we had data to say, this is how much time people concentrate in meetings, and this is how much people are like working during meetings. But then we went into the next level down where we said, well, actually, what is the purpose of a meeting? What are the different types of meetings? And actually, how can we rethink the way we meet? Do we need to always sit in calls? In the office, everybody would just go into a meeting room. But then, although you were in one location, there were different types of meetings. Whereas when you're in a call, sometimes it feels like there's just one type. And actually, when you're at home and you're in back-to-back calls, you realize this may not be the most effective way to achieve an objective. So really like rethinking how we could come together as an organization and use our tools to deliver business objectives. And then that's why collaboration kind of went first. And then business agility. And with agility, you have like traditional functions, so like sales, marketing, finance, HR. But really, is that how people come together when it comes to delivering an outcome or a project? Typically, you have one person from marketing, but you have different people in like a matrix organization, or like they may also be called tribes, squads. We call them pods within Kraft Heinz. But really educating people on how to be effective in these new like agile groups, how to be malleable, how to be flexible, and how to spin in and spin out of these newer working groups. And then finally culminating in design thinking. And design thinking is just one of the problem solving solutions, but really designed to delight, reframing how we identify solutions. And we started with 400 technologists, but we rolled it out to the organization to say, this is not just an IT thing. This is actually when you receive a question or a concern from the customer. Here's some things you can add to your toolkit to really think how, and educating people on the why. We did an exercise where we said, and Damon, you may be familiar with this one from IBM, design an alarm clock. And everybody sketched out an alarm clock. And then we said, let's reframe that question or the problem. Design a new way to wake employees up in the morning. And some people would draw a sunrise or like an English breakfast or a big band or a hammer as a joke, like screaming children, dogs. But these are ways you can rethink a question. And actually maybe an alarm clock is the most optimal outcome, but it should be more about, let's reframe the problem for human-centered design. And even if the original outcome is the same, at least we know we've opened ourselves up to more opportunities.
Those are great examples. Thanks for that. Tell us a little bit about, how you think about building a team for digital, and what are some of the capabilities? If somebody's starting out in this, what are some key skills or things to think about?
When I think about a team for digital, I focus less on the technical. So I think you can teach anybody technical, but it's more about the mindset. And as cliche as this may sound, it really has to start with that like psychological safety. I have learned through fire, let's say, the importance of creating an environment where people feel safe to kind of articulate their ideas, their concerns, And no idea is a bad idea, but no one is too afraid to even say to the leader, hey, hang on, I don't know if this would work, and this is why, because maybe there's something you've not identified that this individual knows. And plus, when you think about digital, it's very much pioneering. You can implement the same technologies as anybody else, but how that impacts your organization is new. So you probably want to create an environment where people feel safe in the unknown. This idea of failing fast again is a really big one that we have had to learn. Don't be afraid, as I mentioned earlier, to have invested a lot of time in something that doesn't necessarily produce the original expected outcome, but maybe a newer outcome. There's another idea is the one about prototyping. We've also recognized to be able to move quickly, you can't always strive for perfection. Something may not always be 100%. And actually maybe you have to learn to solution along the way. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts? I know we were talking the other day about space versus place. What are your thoughts returning to that topic area?
Yes, definitely. I like the two words because when I think of place is quite it's quantifiable, it's bound, it's finite. You think about my laptop is on a place right now, it's on my desk. But when I think about space, I look to the sky and I think space is just infinite. And actually you measure space by what you put into the space as opposed to what it really is. And when I think about space versus place, especially when it comes to the office, I like to call it a digital workspace, because if we provide tools that allow people to be fluid and flexible, then people can work anywhere, anytime, on any device. So how do we enable work to be achieved in different spaces and not bound to a physical rigid place?
Right. And a related question from Melvina: how has the leadership at Kraft Heinz responded to the potential to work differently, especially in defining the role of office? And do you see a need to focus on how leaders adapt their mindset?
Yeah. I like the question, by the way. I think when you have to think about what is the purpose of an office. I think, Elliot, maybe you and I spoke about this a couple of weeks back, and I thought it's not good enough just to tell people you have to go back to the office. Because if I felt productive and I actually recognized that I was productive at home and I felt like I'm looking after my well-being and I feel happier and I feel more complete. And by the way, that is not the case for everybody, but let's just say that is the case for a group of people. Or what is the motivation to go back to the office? And that's when I talk about the idea of like, what is the purpose of the office? We are calling our office more collaboration space. So it may not be the space that you go to do deep work, although we will have space for that should your home environment not permit that, or external environment not permit that. It may not be the space for creativity, although we will also make sure that we can permit that. But really, it will be the space where groups need to physically come together to collaborate or ideate or problem solve, and you kind of just want to draw. And if someone can't be there, the technology almost also permits that, we're looking at a lot of, like I mentioned, these virtual rooms and these interactive whiteboards that work in a home location and also can be replicated and interacted with at home. So when I think about like what is the purpose of the office, I think, well, you have to be very clear in terms of what that office will give that your external locations or other locations doesn't give. The clarity on the purpose of the office is very, very important. And it can't just be, you've got to get back because we paid for it. I mean, that is part of the case, right? But that's not really the leading motivator for an employee, because they'll go and work somewhere else. And when it comes to leadership really needs to be brought into the concept of this: what is the purpose of the office? How do we deliver that? And let go of the idea of like management by observation. It doesn't work these days. When we look at the traditional, and this is, as I mentioned earlier, our organization is 50-50 white collar, blue collar. This mentality doesn't necessarily work with the blue collar, because blue collar workers need to be in a plant or a particular location to deliver an objective. But with the white collar workers, the output isn't very quantifiable. It's not like input, output, and piece rate. Sometimes it's project based. Sometimes it needs to be a variety of different people inputting in. And it's more about like managing status and keeping things on track, as opposed to managing, like ticking off a particular output. So if we know that people work like that, then management by observation doesn't necessarily and by physical observation, as in I see desks, I see like someone at their desk, therefore they are being effective. Well, that doesn't always mean a lot. Sometimes the biggest revelations can come through walking, and really rethinking like, what is the purpose of work? How is work done now? And how has it been done over the last 18 months? And what are the things that we want to keep? And what are the things that we probably want to let go of?
Yeah, I think those are important thoughts. I think it ties back to what you were saying earlier about what's the purpose and what's the problem we're trying to solve. So being more purpose focused in how we think about different spaces. Well, I want to open it up for questions. So in our audience, what questions you have, you can either type it in and I can read it, or you can unmute yourself and ask directly to Tope. What questions do you have?
Hi, this is Shane. If I can ask, as I'm typing, I realize I could just unmute and speak. Tope, listen to you kind of explain how it's very interesting, and I know that from the perspective from an employee experience, it's very easy to get excited about these things. But across the board, when you look at the actual employee kind of take up, have you seen momentum where all employee groups, both the early adopters, the late adopters, and everybody has everybody moved forward? Because, or have you really been able to engage a group of ambassadors to help filter the experience through the rest of the organization?
And Shane, first of all, I love that you talk about different archetypes from these like early adopters. So what it sounds to me like you're describing is this, the innovation adoption curve. I think it's by a guy called, I can't remember the name, George something, but he has like your early he has your enthusiasts, your early, late majority, and then your like laggards is actually what he calls them, but more like traditionalists. And what I'll be very transparent with is, you know, you've got your enthusiasts who represent like 3 to 5% of the population. They will jump at any new development, even if it's in beta phase. And then at the end, you have like your laggards, this group, which is sometimes between like 7 to 10%, who are more traditional. And there's nothing wrong with that. And actually, you answered the question by saying, like, have you identified ambassadors? Now, what I love about this collaboration champions group that we've created, these 500 employees, is that they are spread out globally. Then it's not based on hierarchy. We have some vice presidents in there, and then we have analysts in there. It's the full spectrum of the organization. But using these groups to help us get messages out, using these groups as like our sounding boards, and then also rewarding the groups to help us really help messages stick and land and drive up enthusiasm, energy, and excitement. Again, using our actual, like our executive leadership team to help us get messages out when it comes to like our quarterly town halls. I have gone to every possible length. In fact, we created these like ring lights just for people to attach to their computers as like a reward for people who would engage with maybe any of our content or any of our webinars or any of our like business challenges that we would put out. So some of these little symbols that we created really helped to drum up the enthusiasm and excitement, but then being very cognizant of where the company is. There was a moment when there was almost like too many of these different calls, too many things that we were asking employees. And there were survey fatigue and Zoom fatigue. So we decided, look, we got to back down and just give people the chance to kind of recalibrate and catch themselves again. So in general, I would say employees are excited. People are busy. So I sometimes find myself running discovery sessions with groups. I think, God, we've done this. We've really pushed this out. How did we miss you? But almost, I call it like the death of self. Like tell my partner, I have to die to myself every day and just go in with new enthusiasm and new excitement, even if it feels like I have done this before, because I'm here as a change champion. I'm here as like a change catalyst. And even if it's the first time somebody's seen something that I may have spoken about 100 times, I have to give them the same level of enthusiasm and energy and input as though it was the first time ever. You need quite a strong team to be able to do that, because it can feel quite repetitive, I would say.
Thanks. It's I understand that's repetitive, and the bringing it every single day, even though you've just done the same thing over and over and over again. I'm fully experienced with this. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hey, Tope, this is Damon. I have a quick question for you. I'm curious, kind of if you could elaborate a little bit more on the collaboration kind of quality and quantity between the IT organization and the HR organization. So for example, is it point in time playbacks and showcases across the leadership teams, or is it all the way down at, cross-functional squads that, staffed from both sides? Or I'm just curious what that collaboration looks like for you all.
Yeah, and when you say about collaboration, do you mean about the digital behaviors or how collaboration is actually done?
So delivering improved employee experience, including both the HR team and the IT team. So more on the backstage side.
Yeah, we are true partners. I have a working group, which is, we've got our head of people and performance, we've got people analytics, and then I have communications, and then we have technologists who are subject matter experts and product owners, and we all meet together. In fact, we meet together on a weekly basis and then we have L&D in there as well, because the reality is technology can come up with a solution, HR can come up with an idea, but it needs to work for everybody. And if we think that if we both know the information from employees, but HR lean more into the space of actually the data and the analytics around employees, and then technology leans more into the space of the how, the what, the why, the when, how this technology actually works, it is a fully collaborative process. And I cannot stress enough about having this core working group. I mean, there's 10 of us and we meet every week. Sometimes we don't even have anything to really work on, but it's just a nice meeting. And this is the group that if anything happens, I go to them and say, guys, what do you think? Do you think this would work with this? Is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Are we doing this at the right time? And you need that strong, I really cannot stress enough, that really strong relationship between the two. In an ideal world, you would have one person who kind of would oversee both, and keep that unity. But in the absence of that, you definitely need the two. Otherwise, HR will come up with multiple different vendors for different solutions and make it quite complex. And IT will make something that sounds great, but doesn't actually meet the needs of the employee. So really strong collaboration we used to have them on a weekly basis during COVID, but now it's on a monthly basis. I join all of the communications calls with our global head of communications, and in there we've got all of the HR leads, all of the technology leads, to understand what is going on in the organization and how are we going to solve that. So for sure, that strong collaboration from the top to the bottom to the execution and the delivery. The Design to Delight training that we ran last week, we have our own internal LMS system called University. We work with HR to create University playlists, the technologists to make sure the technology would actually work, communication to make sure we articulated it at the right time in the right Kraft Heinz voice for employees, and then all of our external partners. So yes, more than anything, that is the core working group that I think is very, very important.
It's great to hear. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Thanks for the question. We have time for one more question. One more question from the group.
What I would say, in the absence of questions, this is a forum for anybody. Please also, you can add me on LinkedIn if you want to discuss this further. This is a topic that I absolutely love and adore. I work with the World Economic Forum, looking at new societies and economies. I sit on the Institute for Work and Economy. And I lean into a lot of research in this space. I also work with neuroscientists and doctors in the University of Chicago. So I have access to a lot of different networks and a lot of different research. So even if the question doesn't come today, please feel free to reach out to me. And I don't know if you share contact details, but if you kind of Google me or search on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find me. And I'm really always happy to continue the conversation. This for me is more than work. It's sincerely something that I enjoy.
Thank you so much, Tope, and I'm really happy that you're joining our HX Leaders Network, where we have a more tight exchange with other cohorts and peers. So thank you for sharing on LinkedIn, but also in the group with us. There is one more question about how you think about Microsoft Mesh or the use of avatars.
I love
This is a cool question. I like this.
Cool. So I don't know how many people used to play games when they were younger, but if you're familiar with like Second City or The Sims or any of these like games where you create these avatars, I had this vision of what would it look like if there was a Sims for work. And we've been working with, you've got Microsoft Mesh, there's another organization we explore called Verbella, where you create these avatars. And there's a lot of research that even says, you know, it can build relationships because you don't project what you see on the, you don't project your own bias into the individual you see on the screen. When you see like these ubiquitous universal avatars, I think Microsoft Mesh could be really cool. We tried to bring it into Kraft Heinz for one of our sales calls in the summer, and I would say it was a bit too soon. But I don't think I still don't believe it's something that we should avoid. I think it is incredibly cool. I have this vision of creating a workspace where people can't tell if they're physically or virtually next to one another. Because I think back to those days when I was a teenager and how I just could play The Sims for hours and I felt like I was there. I felt like I was immersed and I felt like I was fully in the game. I think it's one definitely to watch. And when you talk about avatars, we actually had this call yesterday about, I don't know if you guys have seen these avatars where it's like a tablet on almost like a moped. Again, while some of these are like new creative technologies that may never really exist in that way, democratized in the office, I still think they're great to explore because they're just great to explore for like innovation. We've also been looking at I was going to call it virtual reality headset, but it's the HoloLens, for like virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. And what does that look like for collaboration? Now, there's a barrier to entry of like $5,000, but even just the concept of blurring the lines between the physical and the virtual, creating an environment where people can't tell if they are physically or virtually near one another. There's so much neuroscientific research that proves that this can work and it can exist. It can possibly exist in the future. So yeah, definitely continue to lean into it. And Mike, I'd be keen to continue the conversation with you outside of here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great question. And thanks again for everybody who joined us this afternoon. And thanks to Tope for a fascinating presentation. Really enjoyed this. And we're going to continue on in the next hour. For those of you going with us, we'll have Damon's colleague, Owen Michael Hammonds, who's a principal in the design thinking team, in the EX design thinking team at IBM. And then I'll share some research and some different topics and strategies for how to help your organization win in the return to the office. So thanks again to Tope and best wishes.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Take care. Bye now.